Okay, so I started it here. Oh yeah, I'm starting it now. There's just that I can't play any of that music, so he's putting his shirt on. Trying to get this to slow down. Hey, how are you, honey? Hold on, let me do something real quick. Well, no, I was trying to slow this down. I can't get it to. All right, I'm just gonna do it for you. Yeah, I was gonna like get it to slow. Yeah. All right, so well, nobody's on it yet, but that's fine. It's gonna take up just me. It'll take up time. It's fine. Okay, now one person's on. Oh, the one person's me. You guys, I can't play the music because.
All right, we're gonna get started with the slideshow. We'll wait for people to log in and get online, and we'll get started with the. Thanks for coming.
Guys, we're gonna start guys.
All right. Thank you everyone for coming. If you can take a seat, we're gonna get started with the eulogy. My brothers put a lot of effort into this. I'm very excited about it. But thank you for spending a moment of time celebrating a very special man.
Hello. Thanks for being here. This is the hardest thing we've ever had to do. I've dreaded this day for so long because even though I passed away on September 17th, 2021, I remain completely overwhelmed by the loss of my father. And the reason I've dreaded this day is because I really don't want to say goodbye to him. I don't know if I can even say goodbye. I'm going to try today with your help. Appreciate you for that. So thank you for being here. Whether it's in person or on the screen, thank you. He would have loved all of you being here for him, especially the ones who are logged in online to watch this, because he took great pride in working in computers and technology before it was a constant in our life. And when we were kids, I'll never forget the time he brought home a Radio Shack TS 80 personal computer and told us that we better know how to use it. As it turned out, he was right. But more on that later. My father, Roscoe C. Kendall Jr., was born in Ardmore, Oklahoma, September 22nd, 1939. He was one of three siblings, his sister Betty and brother Larry, born to deaf mute parents. His father, Roscoe Sr., my grandfather, whom I never met because he passed away before I was born, he pressed clothes for a living. And according to my Aunt Betty, he was made deaf mute by a shadowy accident when he was a baby. My grandmother, Nola May, was also made deaf mute, but by scarlet fever when she was 16 years old. They were unusually poor growing up, and this had a profound effect on my dad, both mentally and physically. His legs were bowed from poor nutrition, and he was preoccupied with making money as soon as he was able to. He told me it was his obsession to leave Oklahoma, and his words get as far away as he could. It's interesting, because in his last years prior to his passing, he only wanted to go back to Ardmore, Oklahoma. My dad talked a lot about his time at the Super Dog Drive-In, his first real job. He told my brother David Betty got a job there, but Grandma said she couldn't work it. She had to take care of Roscoe. Instead, she brought Roscoe to work early. The manager complained, and Betty told him Dad would work for free. But the manager said no. It didn't matter. He started to work regardless, putting some bottles away, and however he did it, it was all wrong. So the manager finally gave in, taught him to do it right, and after a while, he started banking. That was in 1950. He was 11 at the time. I believe he worked there until he was 18. Just to give you a picture of the times, according to his sister Betty, she would routinely serve people on horseback coming in from the ranches. When he talked about school, he talked mostly about sleeping in his car because he was always so tired from working. He was even sleeping in his car when the prom came around, and he almost missed it because of it. He told my sister Terry that his principal commented that our dad had the best grades for someone who never went to school. He was always obsessed with working and loved the freedoms it afforded. Specifically, he worked to buy cars. He loved cars and always wanted his kids to love cars as much as he did, which is why he bought me and Terry a 1968 Ford Mustang as our first car. We were completely lost on how to take care of this thing and to work on it. He was in high school when he joined the National Guard in 1954. He was in the Ardmore Heavy Weapons Guard Unit, company H, but he was too young at the time, so he had his mother lie about his age for him. He told me once during a present arms to a full-bird colonel who was inspecting. When the colonel saw our dad, he was so small that his sleeves fell over his hands. To which the colonel said, "Son, how old are you?" Roscoe replied, 21, sir. The colonel patted him on the shoulder and said, "Yes, you are, son. Yes, you are." He would go on to join the Navy in 1958. He told my brother he went to join the Army, where he would have started as a staff sergeant, but he was too impatient. Can you imagine? He was too impatient to wait for the recruiter to return from lunch, so he joined the Navy instead. He started over as a seaman. Since he knew all the drills from the Guard, he ended up taking over the squad boot camp because, as our dad put it, the drill sergeant was a drunk. Apparently, the squad did quite well, and he got a lot of awards. He trained as an electrician. He served both the USS Boxer and the USS Kearsarge. Anybody who's seen his hats knows that. He was on another boat in the Gulf of Tonkin and went through the general quarters once. Since the war in Vietnam wasn't an official war until 1963, he is not considered a combat veteran, but he apparently saw both conflicts. He left the Navy in 1961 as a second-class petty officer, which is the same rank as staff sergeant in the Army. What he would have started out as if he had not been patient. After the Navy, he was involved in an accident where he drove his car into someone's house. And if I remember the story correctly, it was a mechanical malfunction and he had spent a lot of money on the car. The judge advised him to leave town, which he did. And he left Oklahoma and moved to Jacksonville, Florida, and his brother Larry joined him soon after. We're not sure, but we think this is where he started working on computers. From there, he took a job as a punch card programmer at Standard Oil in Louisville. And it was here that he married the love of his life, Geraldine Marie Kendall, November 2nd, 1964. Chris was born in 1966, Terry 67, me in 69, and David in 71. When he started a new job in Chicago at the Illinois Central Railroad, they moved to Homewood, Illinois, then Glenwood, Illinois, and then back to Glenwood, Illinois. This would start his trend throughout their entire life, moving all the time. And by 1975, he was working at one of his favorite jobs at Pullman in the Warner Building in downtown Chicago. Pullman was the major force in Chicago, and work life at Pullman. He always had these mementos. He had watches, paperweights, clips, various awards from working there. Our house was always littered with things from Pullman. It was here that he would take us into Chicago, whether it be to see White Sox games or to play at Grand Park. And contrary to what most people think, my dad really loved Chicago. And he told me he felt a special connection to Lake Michigan. I've never understood it too much, but he was always very drawn by Lake Michigan. Unfortunately, our time in Chicago was coming to an end. Pullman didn't last. Trains became less and less important due to the rise ownership in car ownership. And he was laid off. And this really affected him. Getting laid off was not something he was accustomed to, and he had a large family to take care of now. He was able to provide for us by doing menial labor, making a living off of roofing, and had us help him, which I loved, but I think my siblings were less enthusiastic about. He also made the most of his time out of work by spending more time with us, traveling, taking us to a family reunion in Oklahoma, and everywhere in between. My dad had more than a few instances in his life where he was out of work for an extended period of time. But aside from our collective trauma caused from moving, we always had a house, meals, clothes, terrible haircuts, which he gave us, leaving behind scores of bleeding ears. He was finally able to land a job in Terre Haute, Indiana, at Donnelly Directory in 1983, something none of us were particularly thrilled about, but it was a tough time for our family. We didn't stay in Terre Haute very long. We were only there for 3 years. He rose to the top of that company, and the only way to go higher was to take a new job in Bryan, New York. Of course, housing was terribly overpriced compared to Indiana, so we moved to Danbury, Connecticut, and he commuted to work. And he didn't particularly enjoy commuting, and it wore him. So eventually, it would lead to him moving again to an office in Parsippany, New Jersey, and a house in Succotash, New Jersey, in 1988. He finally quit Donnelly in 1989 and went to work back in his beloved Chicago by taking a job that would eventually become an executive vice president position at CNA Insurance. And this was some of his happiest days in my dad's life. He finally felt validated in his work. He lived in a high-rise apartment in downtown Chicago, and with my mom, loved going to dinner, shows around the city, walking through parks, going to museums, and having coffee. Unfortunately, at a certain point in time, his boss was fired, and he was compelled to move out to SRDS. And as a result, they moved again to Park Ridge, Illinois. Their priorities shifted around this time. Having a demanding job started to take a toll on his health, and Mom wanted to get him back to good health. So she took a transfer to Austin, Texas, and they moved again. Austin, Texas turned out to be a great chapter in both of their lives. He loved living in Texas. He was actually very proud to consider himself a Texan. And both of them really enjoyed Austin, their home and their neighbors, like the Cardonis, where he became a proud godfather to Haley, their youngest daughter. He got his college degree, bought a building, managed it, did incubator work at a place called Periscope while Mom worked her job until she retired. Unfortunately, Dad had to fall from a ladder while cleaning his RV. This incident convinced my mom it was time. She really wanted to get back to Louisville to be with her sisters and relatives. After moving around the country for so long to pursue his career goals, she was ready to get back to Louisville, which she considered her home. Apparently, this was a promise my dad made to my mom some time ago, and he was ready to honor it. So they moved to Kentucky, but they didn't move to Louisville. They moved to Georgetown, which seemed to be just far enough away from him, and then eventually to Shelbyville, Kentucky. It's interesting. You can get a pretty full picture of a person's existence when you hear the path they took. But as we know, there's so much more to his life. My dad had a lot of varied interests. Aside from cars, he was a motorcycle and gun enthusiast. He loved reading and politics, enjoyed nature. He played softball and golf, loved dancing. He danced everything from square dancing to disco to ballroom to line dancing. But consider this for a moment. His biggest hobbies were actually our hobbies. He was very active in Indian Guides, Cub Scouts, Webelos, Boy Scouts, Brownies, Girl Scouts, baseball, softball teams, he even coached Terry's softball team. And if I remember, they were quite good, right?
Yeah,
Yes, they won, yes. Not to mention, some of those people we met in the process became lifelong friends of ours. He'd take us dirtbag riding, hiking, swimming, or we'd just drive around and look at Christmas lights. We did a lot of things together. Built a fort, fished, camped, went to parks, for donuts, ate in restaurants, visited mom and work, explored nature reserves, visited childhood homes and landmarks. We drove for days. We went to amusement parks, water parks, Florida, California, Colorado, and the other states. Went to plays, arts, exhibits. Even let us skip school to see Star Wars when it first came out. And he would routinely pull us out of school to go to baseball games. We went to places as a family, and we ate together more often than we did, which I'm still impressed by. When I finally made a name for myself in the concert industry in Chicago, I took him to see his teen idol, Johnny Cash. And I got us this really fancy box. He beamed with joy. He was transfixed 20 feet from Johnny Cash. And I even set up a meeting for him to meet Mr. Cash following the show, but he declined. He told me he wanted to remember him as he thought he knew him, and he didn't want anything to tarnish that image of him. And I think of all these trivial things we did, and suddenly they take on this big meaning, you know? We built a pool with cold slumps, changed oil, fixed bike tires, raked, chopped wood. We picked up every stick in the yard on Saturday and every stone in the yard on Sunday. It's crazy, right? If you ask me about it later, it's a cool story. We made candles, cars, hats, donuts, waffles, cakes for contests, pine box derby cars, pictures for his office. He always had to sit down and draw pictures for his office. You can look them up. Me and him together built the most beautiful bird cage over the course of 6 months that no one will ever see because Mom sold it for a few dollars at the garage sale. And me and Dad never got over it. We were mad at her forever over it. We played frisbee, poker for pennies, Uno, board games, Trivial Pursuit, played tag, hit thousands of balls, played catch for hours in the middle of the street until sunlight. I watched him help and hug strangers, random people, give money to homeless people, make children laugh, tease kids, hit on women, and be very apologetic about it. Sometimes not. I watched him dance with all the girls at the wedding. Sneak desserts from Mom's back. Complain about people, the government, the military, the public, the police. But then he had a really profound respect for all of them. You know? Watched him read books, watch movies, loved westerns, comedies, action movies, any show with gratuitous sexual content. Something he was interested in. We laughed and cried, hurt, soothed, ranted, raged, danced, sang, kissed and hugged. He always kissed and hugged me. Throughout my life, and by doing this, he made me an affectionate person. He kissed and hugged all of us, but he never bailed me out of jail. And he told me over and over again, he said, if you go to jail, you're on your own. And he meant it. And I learned that over and over again. And we talked, whether it be by phone or by card, or by letter or by email, or a very sweet thank you note with the kindest sentiment. We fought and argued a lot, usually about politics, but it was always okay. After the conversation was over, we apologized to one another. My dad loved his kids. It was always the first words out of his mouth. His second words were always, when are you coming to see us? He was incredibly defensive of us. Say a bad word about us, and you incurred his wrath. And not just you. If I said a bad word about my siblings, he was ferocious about it. And my mother would say a bad word about her, and you might never be in his presence again. And I inherited this from him. He would punish you with his absence. It was unforgiving. If you didn't know my dad and had never met him, you would know them by his children. We each inherited a quarter of his personality, good and bad. If you put me, Chris, Terry, and David together, that's my dad. Chris inherited his stubbornness, that same love for his child and his grandchildren, his temper, his charity, his work ethic, even went into the same field. Terry inherited his stubbornness, his drive and determination, his persistence, his tenacity, his love of friends and family. David inherited his stubbornness, his openness, his sense of humor, his wit, his technical aptitude, his wanderlust, his melancholy, his solitude. I inherited, you guessed it, his stubbornness, his gregariousness, his argumentativeness, his combative nature, but also his caring and consideration, not to mention his love of getting his hands dirty, doing manual labor. Did I mention his stubbornness? Put us all together and he had my father. He also loved his friends, and he had a lot of them, all across the country throughout his entire life. He especially loved Joe Bosney, who was a constant in our life. He passed away too early for us, so my dad never recovered from it. I assume he felt about Joe kind of in the same way I feel about him now. He took his passing very hard, and Knowing how hard that was for him, I can't help but think there's a silver lining to my mom and dad's passing away in close proximity, both spatially and chronologically. I've never known a couple that loved each other in the way they loved each other. It was inspiring. It was absolute. One couldn't live without the other. My dad depended on my mom and loved her, unquestionably. He demanded her time and attention, her presence, her affection, her food, her love, and her care. I always felt it must have been exhausting for her. But she loved him absolutely as well. They were joined at the hip. Interesting fact, my mother loved dogs. We had a couple, but she always wanted another one. And she talked about it all the time. My father, on the other hand, hated dogs. Not because he actually hated dogs, he didn't. But because the dog's a pet that take away attention from my dad, that he craved from my mom. So my dad didn't want anything coming between him and my mom, including furry animals. So as much as I would give everything I have for just one more hour with him, he said comfort in that they passed very close to one another, painlessly and quickly. They were both in a lot of pain. But my mother was worse, and she didn't have a lot of time. My dad had terrible anxiety about it. This would cause him to lash out at her. But he didn't mean it. He was just as scared of having to live his life without her, and he was incredibly frustrated by the thought of it. See, my dad was a beautiful person. But he had that other side. He was easily upset. And I'm sure we all have experienced it. He would yell first and think later. He would react in ways you wouldn't expect. But for me, I eventually learned to see him as that scared, anxious child from his early upbringing when he did that, and I would forgive him instantly in the moment. I have so many memories of him. I feel books. It's not necessary though, because they're mine, just like yours are yours. So I don't need to go back very far. When they were starting to struggle, I visited them as often as I could. And those last visits are etched in my brain. Things like him bringing mom coffee every single day while she was in rehab. I know because I went with him every time. He would get up early, go downtown, and get her a very expensive coffee. And he would have exact change, which something I still don't understand. And he did this every day. And it didn't. If she didn't like the food that day, he would bring her lunch and or dinner every day as well. And he was really scared for her well-being. I know because he wasn't smiling and laughing that much during those visits. So when I saw him smile, it had an impact on me. And that's why I can't forget those stupid red sneakers. See, I love sneakers. And I always tried to get him to buy nice sneakers for himself, but he wouldn't. It was funny too, because he loved my sneakers, and he would always gaze at them and ask me about them, and when I told him how much they cost, he'd tell me that's a waste of money. Well, nothing to do with it. And truthfully, he's the one that got me into expensive sneakers, because as a child, I had flat feet. I had a lot of problems with my feet. And after some browbeating from my mom, he caved in and finally started buying me nicer sneakers. And because of this, I had to make sure they lasted a long time, so I had to take really good care of them, so that I wasn't going to get my siblings mad, because my sneakers had cost 3 times longer than theirs. So imagine how surprised I was when during one of those last visits, I saw him wearing this brand new pair of garish red Adidas skate shoes. And I told him how much I liked them, and of course I gave him a hard time about it because I was shocked he bought them. He told me he had to buy them because Darren and Terry had red sneakers, and he wanted to be like them too. And now when I think about it, I smile because that was him. He loved me, loved. And I'm so glad I told him I loved him all the time. He loved being included, appreciated, thought of. And he returned the favor. He gave me a good life. He gave all of us a great life. Because if you knew him, you knew he loved you. Now I have this hole that I can't fill, these memories that I can't replace, a voice I'll never hear again, in a place in inside of me that will forever remain empty. He was my father, my friend, my confidant, my teacher, sometimes my student. He was my hero. The last words he said to me was at the hospital. He was confused. He was really happy to see me. And when I heard he was sick, and in the hospital, thanks to my wife, Denise, I went out immediately. He looked at me, he smiled, and Roscoe smiled, that we all know, because it seems to appear in his entire life. Chris, Terry, David, Michael, Lily, Kathy, Monty, Kelsey, Nina, everybody has this Roscoe smiles. And he said to me in the most innocent way, he said, "You were always my champion." I held his hand and I looked at him and I said, "Yeah, Dad, you were always mine." He was my champion. I will miss him deeply for the rest of my life, for as long as I'm alive. So rest in peace, Dad. And goodbye, Roscoe Calvin Kendall Jr. You're one of a kind, and there will never be another one just like you. We love you. I love you. Goodbye. And hopefully, it's only goodbye for now. But if not, thank you and goodbye. Thank you. Now, we were thinking if anybody else wanted to talk, relay a memory, good, bad, beautiful, or ugly, we'd love to hear about it.
You know, it's funny, when we were giving this eulogy together, I realized so many things I didn't know about my dad. And then when we were putting the slideshow together, and as I cleaned out the house, I found all these old black and white pictures, a whole box of them. I had never seen my dad as a child, ever, until a few months ago, which is interesting. All right, so it's a hard day. What's it going? So when I was trying to think about what I would say, Keith did a really good job because there's so much to my dad and his complications as a person. In the natural order of things, we just always expect our parents to go before us, and that's how we think life is going to be. So in our brain, we prepare ourselves. We watch others deal with it. We empathize. But you have no idea what it feels like until you go through it. We talk about that. And then you have to figure out how to live your day-to-day existence without your parents. How many times I reached to pick up the phone to call my mom or call my dad? Or I think of a story or something funny happens, and I can't wait to tell them, and then I can't. So as a kid, I was called Little Roscoe. Remember that? Yes. It used to kind of bug me, kind of make me proud at the same time. But I was a lot like him. I had a sense of humor, and I had his energy, and I had his stubbornness, and his tenacity, and a little strong sense of fairness and principles. That was my dad. But I was in awe of him. I thought he could do anything, and that opinion never really changed. So as a kid, he was fun, he was funny, he was athletic, he was bold, he was daring, he was fearless, he was wise, energetic, loving. And he's right. I'm such an affectionate person. That's how I show people I care. That's how I show people I love them. If someone's hurting, I automatically touch them. That was my dad. Very quick to tell people I love them, just like my dad. My dad had no inhibitions about telling someone that he loved them. He'd see someone, he never really met a stranger. I mean, half the time he would go to the grocery store just to talk to people. But as I got older, I saw the complications that made my dad my dad. He was very quick to react. Nobody has not been a target of his temper. It was scary. He could be critical, perfectionistic. His go-to feeling was anger. He was blunt. He could very much lack empathy at times. But what was nice and what softened that is as fast as that feeling came on and that reaction came on is as fast as it dissipated. and he was back to joking with you and laughing with you, even when you weren't ready for it. But he was done, so he was good. When I look back, like Keith, I think about all the fun we had. He would work a hard job all day, but he came home right into his play clothes. He was playing catch with us, wiffle ball, frisbee 500, tennis, hitting the balls around. He played with us, wrestled with us. He took us on motorcycle rides. He taught me to ride when I was 11. He taught me how to fish. Which makes sense now, Cindy, I was in awe of the circus. Like, I loved the circus as a kid. And I remember he took me to Chicago, just me, probably don't know that. Just me to Barker's Family Circus, because I loved it. I couldn't get enough of circus. But he even took me on a motorcycle trip from Terre Haute to Homewood in the rain, just for an orthodontist appointment. And we had stupid little tarps on, and we're in the rain, it's drizzly rain for 3.5 hours. So the energy level of his really never stopped. A couple of times we went zip lining. You remember that, Nina? Went zip lining at Black Mountain. It was about 300 to 400 feet up in the air. He was 70, I want to say it was like late 70s, 77, 78. And he, at one point, Nina, you might remember this, it was 45 minutes. We was the only zip line that had no shelter, and for 45 minutes we were stuck in a very scary thunderstorm. And I think me and Nina just like hugged the tree, right? Because we were trying to hide, and my dad was pretty calm about it. I mean, he was fearless. And then this would happen at 72. He's telling me how he's on a trampoline at a party, and he hurt his neck because he did a front somersault. And I said, Dad, you can't just go on a trampoline and do a flip. You have to warm up for a little while. And he said, well, I jumped on it for 2 hours. Isn't that long enough? I'm like, you can never complain about my aerial performing ever again, ever. Because he hated that I was performing up there. He was like, you're gonna get hurt, you're gonna get hurt. And when I played football, I heard it a lot too. Why are you playing football? You're gonna get hurt. It never stopped. In his last year, we went golfing. I think he was over it at that time. His strength had really lessened, but he hits way straighter than I did. He walked, and I'm a fast walker. He still, up until his last month or two, he walked faster than I did. He also played racquetball when he was little. That was a big one too, yeah. Dad was a really loving partner to Mom. He was always hugging her. As a kid, we used to call it cupcaking. Do you remember that term? We're like, oh, you're cupcaking. Because they were always hugging. He would always hold my mom's hand as they walked. He just looked at her always that he really loved her. Did they have some little, like, oh, you're an asshole? Yeah, but it was over, done, fast. It was never a drawn out fight. It just kind of like, no. Oh, you're such an asshole. Okay, and there was a joke made, and it was fine. But I'll tell you, they weren't perfect, no couple is, but they did show me the importance of nurturing a relationship. Communicating when there were issues. My mom said, she's told me several times the reason they're still together, that it was because my dad always made sure they talked things out and they communicated. And that was from him. When she'd be ready to walk out the door because she's got 3 or 4 kids and he's working all the time and she's like, I'm done with this. He's like, no, we're gonna figure this out. Let's talk about it. And that was from my dad. They also showed me that you need to have fun with the person you're with. And the most important one was putting the other person first. My dad was a teacher. He taught me gardening, roofing, landscaping, fishing, a little bit of carpentry, car care, taxes, the motorcycle. I grew up so independently, and that was in large part due to him not limiting me because I was the girl. I was the only girl. I was his little girl. We shared the same love languages. We're both physical affection and positive affirmations. I can't say he was super complimentary as a kid, but I know in my last 10, 15 years, I heard a lot of compliments. I heard regularly that he loved me. Regularly that he thought I was beautiful and talented. And the most important one was that he really was proud of me and all that I accomplished in life. So here we are, trying to figure out life without mom and dad. I remember 2 years ago, my dad said that he wished he could have just one more conversation with his parents. And I get that now, because I wasn't ready for him to go at all. Every day, I tell him I miss him. Every day I think of funny things he would say or do, or stories I would love to tell him. So I had this dream Friday that he called me, and there's a picture of me with it's me and him at daddy-daughter date night. I was like 7. And it comes up on my phone whenever he called. So this picture came up when he called. And the only thing I thought that dream meant is that I just wanted one more conversation. My dad's, he really was my hero. He was an amazing human being. And I think he would love it that everybody took the time to just celebrate him as a person. I'm just grateful. So thank you. If anybody else would like to talk. I want to lay it down.
Yeah. I'm enjoying how much time changes things. There was a time when I would be the only one prepared for this kind of thing with speeches, and now Keith and Terry are terribly prepared, and I haven't even thought about this. So, yeah, thanks for coming to just help listen to us about our dad. It means a lot just to be able to share with all of you someone who is so important to us. And I can't really add much to Keith and Terry's beautiful statements. But I did think of some stories that, besides of my dad, that I don't think people got. And one of them Keith will remember, because we were in Danbury, Connecticut, and you had a record player downstairs. And he got me and Keith and was like, come with me. And we shut all the blinds and went downstairs, and Dad had these records. And we closed the doors, and we put these records on. And they were like comedians and musicians, and they're actually very funny. They just use the N-word a lot. Very funny. And Richard Pryor was around. We didn't think of it, And when I got older, what I realized was these were segregation area comedians. And he would play these for us and would say, "You remember, right?" Yeah. He would play these for us, and he'd say, "Hey, you can't play these anymore. You can't do this anymore." And we was like, we just didn't understand that. Of course, now we do, and for very good reason. You don't play these anymore. But the thing that I think is hard to appreciate is, for us, we get older and the world changes and the things we enjoy change, and it's really normal, but it's hard to appreciate just how much my dad's entire childhood was wiped out by changes. Like his world that he grew up in and he understood and he knew got obliterated by the time we were teenagers. So he was navigating this very new place. And he was navigating it really well. But there were times where you didn't appreciate about him just how much he had to navigate in his life. You could think that somehow he was something other than he was, which is a wonderful person, Keith and Terry described. The other there was so in business he was businessy. He loved corporate America. He loved the fight of it. He loved having to pull all-nighters to get the system out at the last minute. And he loved drinking with the coworkers. I mean, just all the 3 martini lunch thing. You always yell about Carter getting rid of the 3 martini lunch, the high sin. And he was pretty brutal. I have, be honest, he was a brutal businessman. He was up there with he was the top for good reason, And I remember, and what's funny is he would always take us. So, we go to they take us to dinners and with these businessmen, and the businessmen would be like, I expect you guys to eat your fill, and they had expense accounts, so they'd be buying us like 2 surf and turf entrees just to watch us eat this. We were in sports, so we were consuming, 10,000 calories. So it was just like this sport to watch us eat. But one time he took me on a boat ride with some of the salesmen for his organization, and we were all joking around, drinking beer and all this, and I didn't really know why I was there, but it was cool. Dad goes into the lake for a swim, swimming around, and the sales guys look at me and they go, "Hey, your dad is growing up with him kind of like growing up with the Great Santine." And so if you haven't seen the movie, the Great Santine was this Marine fighter pilot who was really hard on his family, really hard, super competitive, wouldn't let the son win, And I had seen the movie, and I was hit like that, and I went, "Oh my God, my dad absolutely loves his children." And they were shamefaced. Like, there was this, you thought, like, it was the game, like, what was real was his love and his family. And he was doing the business for the family, for us to have this great life, and for them to have a great life. And he cared so little about what people, like, shallowly thought of him that he didn't pull any punches with anyone. And so after people just got the wrong idea, they'd meet us, and they'd be like, "What's it like growing up with him?" We'd be like, "It's great." And no one could believe it, but it really was, as Terry pointed out, a really huge amount of fun. I always got along with him wonderfully. We were 2 amazingly different people. I'm this Buddhist pacifist, and Dad loved the military, and I'm definitely intellectual, and he's rather anti-intellectual, and we fought about it all the time, and we just loved fighting about it all the time. We hung out all the time. It was just he really had. There's no rules. There's no tribal affiliation. He just wanted someone to love, and we were his kids. So it was beautiful. The other thing that about my dad was he talked with me about religion all the time. It's really easy to look at my dad and think he was a-religious, but Dad believed very much in Jesus Christ. He believed very much in Calvary. He believed, he was a Christian for sure, but he was also very New Agey. So he believed a lot in angels and reincarnation, and it was definitely the Catholic Church where it had some issues with him. He told me when he was, I asked him if he had been baptized a certain, what he been baptized, and he said everything. I've been baptized everything. And I said, well, that's ridiculous. You can't do that. And he said, no, you got to understand, when you grow up in Ardmore, Oklahoma, the only place to be women is in church. So he would go and say, his buddy would say, "Come on, let's go to this church. We'll go meet some pretty girls there." Oh yeah, go to the church. And of course, this was you guys are all from the South, so you got this. It's like, who's going to come up and say, "Jesus Christ, we can get baptized." And the dude, his friend, would say, "Hey, if we stand up and get baptized, all the girls are going to come talk to us. And we can get to meet him that way, so let's go get baptized." And Roscoe every time told me he'd be like, "Yeah, it's okay. On the count of 3, 1, 2, 3, and Roscoe would stand up, his buddy would sit back down." And so they said he fell for it every time. He doesn't know why, but he always ended up taking up there. "Come on, brother," And so he said, "I've been baptized and everything." I said, "Well, you don't go to church." He says, "That's not true." I said, "Really? You go to church?" He said, "Oh yeah, I go to church all the time." I said, What church do you go to, Dad?" He said, "The Church of Roscoe." I said, well, that's interesting. Where's church? And he'd say, well, it's everywhere. God's always with me. One of the big problems with religious people like me is we think there's something really special about our religion. And there is something very special about our religion. It really is. But I think we kind of sometimes miss the forest for the trees. And Dad didn't. Dad, we argued about this quite a bit, and not argued, we discussed it quite a bit. And there's you guys may know St. John of the Cross. He talked a lot about prayer and what prayer meant and what the forms of prayer were and which were better. And St. John of the Cross said the truest form of prayer was to be in union with God. Don't think for a second my dad was an extremely religious. And don't think for a second that God didn't love my dad very, very much. Because my dad lived in union with God. And he would go out and we would just walk and he would say, thank you for taking me to the cathedral. It's like I feel God's presence here. And Dad lived in union with God. And it just showed his life so much. It's been a minute since they passed. It's a little bit. It's nice to with Mom. It was so immediate, and you felt very. You're kind of living through the trauma. It's nice to get some perspective. I'm so grateful to be their son, just like we all are. We're so grateful to be the children of Roscoe and Jerry. And thank you all again. Please, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Get up if you like talking. Come on up. Tell us your favorite story. It means so much to us. Don't be shy, please. So, stand up, please. Tell us a story. Come on. I feel like I'm in front of what's that? Come on. Come tell a story. Everyone wants to hear a story. Don't tell each other, tell me. What's funny is I can, when there's no microphone, I can get everybody to tell some stories.
So when David talks about Roscoe and his religion and being all supposed to baptize everything, I look back and Jerry Roscoe were always inclusive and everyone was their child. And I know Laura really wanted to be here today, but she had a work commitment for training that she had to do for a long time ago. But she loved it very deeply. And when we had a chance to go on vacation, it was just Laura and I wasn't there. She wanted to go to Jerry Roscoe's and they would fight about him shooting these the rabbits to get them to leave the garden. And Roscoe was very passionately loving about people in general, always inclusive. Everyone, and there were no strangers, and all his neighbors were family, and everyone's children were theirs. And I remember going to Texas, and we'd go and visit them there and play table tennis with Roscoe, and Mara playing Wii and feeding him, and like David said, was picking on children. But she would pick right back, and he would let her, and it was so funny. And Geraldine would laugh, and he loved all of his children. And Michael, when he was a little bitty baby and came to the hospital, and my mother said, he doesn't look like my children. And Geraldine said, it's because he looks like us. and they claimed him right away. And Michael always had Roscoe's smile, contagiously so. And his children had that same smile. And the love that they gave and all of us, the love that they have shared and included us into their family, into their lives. Going dancing with Roscoe, having business dinners with Roscoe, seeing him competitively fight to license a cigarette. And table to table, just the things that, he was just very full of life and always including everyone in his life. And those are the things that I remember about Julie and Roscoe. I think the first time I had met them, and I had a very bad sunburn, and Jeremy took me in the other room and had no qualms, just asking to undress and putting aloe or something like that. And it was very unusual for me, but I felt love. And, you know, for a teenage girl who's a little bit shy, that was really an experience. But you never felt awkward around them. You always felt included. You always felt loved. You always felt like you belonged to them. And I always have. And I really appreciate that about both of them. Thank you for sharing them with us.
Yeah.
I don't know that they would have given you any different choice, but.
Would anybody else like to say anything? Anybody?
Yeah. Sorry. I laugh awkwardly when I'm nervous. I just put this stuff on. Who am I? Sorry. I have Keith's wife. So some people at home may know me. And so I was Roscoe and Jerry's daughter-in-law. So I was just, there's always this thing, right? They say that women marry their fathers. But Keith married his father. I am Roscoe Calvin Kendall. So good. Yeah, because we butted heads a lot, because we're the same person. And yeah, I loved Roscoe. I really did. And of course, Jerry. Just from the in-laws, you guys know there's always these stories about horrible in-laws and everything. I will tell you that Roscoe and Jerry were the most amazing in-laws to me, and just so nice and always welcoming. You know, Keith brought this young, much younger girl home, and we're like, who is this? What's going on here? We like move in together, move out to Florida. I mean, it was the whole thing, and it was always like not weird to them, weird to my parents, not to them, and it was just all love all the time. Super quick story. When I was starting my business with Keith, and we had just got an office when we were in Tampa. I was just like really overwhelmed, and I don't know if you must have mentioned it. You're like, yeah, Janice is this. There's all these five. We had to do all this stuff, and it was like the Kendall brigade came down. They like hopped in their car, and they drove down and like came in and made file folders and got on the computer and did all this stuff. And I was like, oh, Jerry can do that. Roscoe can do that. And I should have known, but it just. And sometimes still, at some storage unit, I find those files that they made with the label maker, and so good. But they always came to the rescue, and very generous with us, helped us get our first house. You know, very active in our wedding plans, and just always, like you said, a champion. So I just wanted to say that. Also, thank them for raising a wonderful son who's. Husband, hopefully for a long time. We can do it. We just did 10 years. Yeah, they weren't there for the 10 years, and that was sad. So they were very proud of us, and yeah, we're gonna try, right? We're gonna try real hard. So I never maybe didn't say it enough, but Jerry and Roscoe, thank you very much, and you will be very missed.
So I knew Roscoe just a little over a year, but listening to the stories of how stubborn he was and all those things, I feel like I know my whole life. That there is Roscoe. The very first day I met him, I come in and I try to do the right thing and reach out to shake his hand, and he looks at me and goes, I don't care how big you are, you're gonna hug me. So that was every time I saw him. You know, when I walked in the door and when I walked out of the door, that's what he did. You know, Keith mentioned him sneaking desserts behind his mom's back. Well, I'm type 2 diabetic, and as Jerry and Terry So we snuck desserts together for a little while. I just walking in from day one, I felt like family. I felt like I was both. My both of them, and even meeting David and Keith, I feel both. There was never any differences in ethnicity or lifestyles or anything. It was just, hey, you're family now, man. That's the way I feel. And I believe it started with Roscoe here. Even Pat and Linda and Tony, going to visit Tony and Linda, we share some Roscoe stories and we laugh and we talk about how much we miss him. Because he is a very missable person. It was never a dull moment. So, for the short time that I got to know you, thank you all for sharing it. And I miss him.
So I am the proud grandson of Roscoe Kendall. And I say that probably with more meaning than I would usually say I'm proud of anything. Like I really can say that's a lineage I'm very proud to come from. And as I was sitting there thinking, I have a lot of memories of being very small, so they're very kind of vague and nascent kind of memories with my grandpa growing up. But what I remember a lot is that he was a lot of fun when I was little. Like from build a pillow fort with you to go rollerblading to like whatever. He had more ideas of what would be fun to do than like playmates my age would. That was just who he was. Fast forward a little bit, I think my grandfather really taught me an important lesson when I was a teenager, a young teenager, preteen. About, and it's the only time, people often talk about, his temper. The only time I remember him ever raising his voice to me was about respect. And at the time, and probably still a little bit now, I had very little respect for authority or propriety or anything about like the way you're supposed to do things, right? But I had never seen it from the lens he did. He got upset for me for letting everyone else clean up after dinner and doing nothing. Right? Mm-hmm. And he, of course, was very angry and didn't really convey the point at the time. But then afterwards, it was about not taking people that he cared about, but he thought I should care about too, right? Not taking them for granted. And respect for other people was is how you show that they matter. And that really changed for me as a young man, how I interact with other people in those sort of situations, because I hadn't seen it from that lens, honestly. And he was just really an upstanding, like a good man who lived it, absolutely. The other thing that this really powerful thing for me, for my grandfather, was starting a family really young and struggling a lot with that. Every time I saw my grandparents, and it was very regularly, they'd come see us, or we'd go down, we'd go camping together, which is what they loved to do when they had their RV. Every time it would just assure us that we were doing everything right. We talk about how much of a struggle things were, and we're like, well, that's normal. You're raising kids, you're having a young family, that's what it's like. Never made it feel like, oh, we need to do it the right way, or no, we're doing it the wrong way. That was just absolutely unconditional love and encouragement, and he would say that he was proud of me, he was proud of us and our family, and that meant a lot. It means a lot knowing that, and I still think about that a lot whenever I'm having doubts about anything in my adult life. I remember that my grandfather was very proud of me the way I was, imperfect and all, and really loved everything that I'd done with my life, and I appreciate that a lot.
Thanks. Go ahead. Let me give it to you.
Are you really sure? I'm like, I didn't prepare. Okay. But, and I won't go back to lots and lots of stories I can think of, and I I always felt that I raised Jerry because I was the oldest. And so I think when Roscoe came into our lives in 62, 3, we had a love-hate relationship going, because I was very protective with Jerry. And she had lived with me at that point. She was living in our basement. We had remodeled the basement for 2 years too. And she lived with us for a while, so we got to see him right off the bat. And he was a fiery guy, very definitely opinionated, and we learned that, and we learned how it was going to be. Because I think we had to struggle through some of those pieces where we didn't really agree on some things, and we had to be quiet about it or not. And some of them we kind of did that, but we always ended up with a good relationship, and we stayed close for a long time. Jerry would come into Louisville with Roscoe, and they would take care of my house, and I would go off to the hospital, have a baby, and they'd be there when I came home. So they were always there even when they lived in Chicago, and we would trek in the snow to see Jerry and Roscoe with carload of kids. Car might break down, might not. We'd get up there and we'd watch the weather forecast, and when snow was coming, we'd head back home. Jerry and Roscoe were both with us after Michael's death. We went to Terre Haute, and what we do on Christmas, we went out to a Chinese restaurant. And there was a heating problem, and I remember something was going wrong with the heat when we got back to the house, but we all stayed together. And so we had the intensity of relationships, but we had a lot of love between all of us. And the guys used to always label us the go-by girls, and that you know that one for a long time, but he didn't seem to bother him. So it was hard seeing them in their decline. And it was really difficult to see both of them go at the same time. But I know they're in a better place. And for that,
Thanks, Dad.
Suzanne, you're always up for me. Thank you.
Thanks, Dad. It's beautiful. Chance. Yeah.
I just want to add one thing to what Beth was saying. This is funny because I passed my mom right around the time when she was calling me late at night when she was going through cancer, and we would talk sometimes 3, 4 in the morning, 5 in the morning. And I asked her about what was it like when you first met Dad, and she said, "Oh, I hated him." And I said, "Why did you hate him?" "Because he was terrible." And I said, "What did your sisters think?" "They agreed." "And how did you get together?" "I don't know." That's why I had that much.
And that was I don't remember really hating him, but we did.
They're being polite.
I actually know the answer to that. What mom had told me was all of her other boyfriends had no ambition, and Dad was going somewhere. She wanted to be with somebody, she didn't just want to sit around all day, she wanted to be with somebody who had goals. Dad had goals.
He had a girlfriend, you guys.
Yeah.
Oh, you're gonna spill it now. Yeah.
Yeah, she won.
There you go.
We do have food, so hang around. There is a bar, so make yourself at home. Just enjoy the life celebration / memorial. Thanks for coming again. Thank